He stepped inside quietly, the way someone does when they don't want to be noticed, when they want to feel the pulse of a place without disturbing it. The automatic doors slid shut behind him with a soft sigh, sealing him into the rhythm of scanners beeping, carts rolling, and voices rising and falling in tired repetition. The air smelled of reheated food and disinfectant, a scent so familiar it barely registered for most people. For him it did. Every detail did. He adjusted the brim of his cap lower on his face and moved with the slow patience of an ordinary customer, grabbing a basket, pretending to browse. He had walked through dozens of locations like this before, always unnoticed, always anonymous. That anonymity was his shield. No one looked at him twice, and that was exactly how he wanted it. As he turned down the aisle nearest the registers, something caught his attention. Not a sound at first, but a posture. A stillness that didn't belong amid the controlled chaos of checkout lines. One of the cashiers stood rigid, shoulders pulled inward, chin lowered as though bracing against something invisible. Her hands moved mechanically, scanning items with practiced precision, but her eyes betrayed her. They were glassy, unfocused, and rimmed with red. A tear slid down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, hoping no one had seen. Someone had. A man stood a few steps behind her, not helping, not assisting, just watching. His arms were folded, his stance wide, authoritative. He leaned slightly toward her, invading space that didn't belong to him. His voice was low, but sharp enough to cut. "Pick it up," he said. "You're holding the line." She nodded, lips pressed tight, and scanned faster. The machine beeped again and again, each sound like a countdown. The customer in front of her sighed loudly and checked their phone. Someone else in line shifted impatiently. No one said anything. The man with the basket slowed, pretending to examine a rack of candy bars near the register. His eyes stayed on her. On the way her fingers trembled just enough to notice. On the way she swallowed hard between breaths, as if steadying herself against a wave. Another whisper came from behind her. "And wipe your face. You look unprofessional." Her shoulders stiffened. She didn't turn around. "Yes," she said quietly. Something twisted in the observer's chest. He'd spent years reviewing reports, sitting in boardrooms, hearing filtered versions of what happened on floors like this. Numbers. Percentages. Complaints summarized into neat bullet points. None of those reports had ever conveyed this moment, the way humiliation could be delivered without shouting, without spectacle, just enough to wound while staying deniable. He stepped into line. From this angle, he could see her profile more clearly. She looked young, but exhaustion aged her. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes that no amount of sleep could erase, shadows carved by stress, by worry, by endurance. She smiled automatically at the next customer, a thin, fragile thing that barely reached her eyes. "Did you find everything okay today?" she asked. The customer barely looked up. "Just ring it," she complied. The supervisor's gaze remained fixed on her, heavy and unrelenting. "You missed the coupon," he said, louder now. "Again." She paused, confusion flickering across her face. "I'm sorry. I didn't see. I've told you before," he cut in. "Pay attention." A few people nearby glanced over. She felt it, the heat of eyes, the sting of being singled out. Her cheeks burned. She nodded again, bending slightly to retrieve the coupon slip. As she did, another tear fell, landing on the counter. She froze, hoping it would go unnoticed. It didn't. The supervisor leaned closer. "This isn't a charity," he said, voice dropping into something cold. "If you can't handle a simple job, there are plenty of others who can." The words weren't shouted. That was what made them worse. They were delivered with confidence, with the assurance of someone who believed himself untouchable. The man in line felt his jaw tighten. He gripped the handle of his basket, knuckles whitening. He forced himself to stay still, to stay silent. Not yet. She finished the transaction and slid the receipt across the counter with shaking hands. "Have a good day," she said, barely above a whisper. The customer took it, and walked away without responding. The line moved forward. Now she was scanning his items. She didn't look at him at first. Her breathing was uneven, shallow. When she finally glanced up, their eyes met for a brief second, and something in her expression shifted. Not recognition, just surprise at being seen. "You can take your time," he said gently. Her lips trembled. She nodded, grateful but wary, as if kindness itself had become something unpredictable. She scanned the last item, and that was when the dam broke. A soft sound escaped her, somewhere between a breath and a sob. She turned her face away, pressing her fingers to her eyes, shoulders shaking despite her effort to control it. "I'm sorry," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. Behind her, the supervisor sighed loudly. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "Every single shift." That was when she spoke again, so quietly it seemed she didn't mean for anyone to hear. Her voice cracked, worn thin by restraint. "I'm trying," she said. I need this job." The sentence landed like a weight. The man with the basket didn't move. He didn't breathe. He listened. She swallowed, staring at the counter as if it were safer than looking up. "I can't afford to lose it," she whispered. "Not right now," the supervisor scoffed. "That's not my problem." Something inside the observer hardened. He had come here expecting inefficiencies, maybe morale issues, perhaps a minor policy violation. He had not expected to hear desperation whispered over a cash register, not expected to witness power wielded so casually, so cruelly. She finished his transaction, hands still trembling. He took the receipt but didn't leave immediately. He hesitated, torn between instinct and strategy. Finally, he leaned in slightly and spoke low enough that only she could hear. "You don't deserve this," he said. Her eyes widened just a fraction. She looked up at him, searching his face for something: mockery, judgment, pity. She found none. Just quiet certainty. Before she could respond, the supervisor stepped closer again, clearing his throat. "Move along," he said sharply. "You're blocking the lane." The man nodded and stepped away, but his eyes never left her. As he walked toward the exit, he felt the weight of what he'd just witnessed settle heavily on his shoulders. That single sentence echoed in his mind, looping, refusing to fade. "I need this job." He knew then that this visit would not end the way the others had. Something had been exposed, something raw and undeniable, and there was no unseeing it now. The rush thickened as the afternoon wore on, the kind of crowd that arrived hungry and impatient, carrying the weight of their own bad days. The lines stretched longer, voices grew sharper, and the hum of the store climbed a pitch. She returned to her register after a brief break that hadn't been a break at all, just a few minutes in the back to splash water on her face and breathe until the tightness in her chest loosened enough to function. She stood straighter now, determination hardening her spine. Whatever else happened, she would not cry again. Not out there. Not in front of them. The first few customers passed without incident. She scanned, bagged, thanked, repeated. Her hands still shook, but she willed them steady. The supervisor hovered again, pretending to check his phone, pretending not to watch every movement she made. Then it happened. A woman slammed a basket onto the counter hard enough to rattle the register. Items spilled out, produce rolling, cans clanking. The sound snapped every head nearby in their direction. "Seriously?" the woman snapped. "Are you kidding me?" "I'm sorry," she said quickly, crouching to gather the fallen items. "I'll clean that up." "Just ring it," the woman said, eyes narrowing. "I've been standing here forever because you people don't know how to work." The word landed heavy. She flinched but kept moving. The supervisor seized the moment like it had been handed to him. "You see?" he said loudly, addressing no one and everyone at once. "This is what happens when you don't stay focused." Her hands froze mid-reach. She straightened slowly, cheeks burning. "I didn't drop it," she said softly. "The basket." "Excuses," he cut in. "Every time." The woman smirked, emboldened. If she can't handle a register, maybe she shouldn't be here. A few people in line chuckled. Someone else nodded. Others stared at the floor, suddenly fascinated by their shoes. She felt the heat rise up her neck, the pressure behind her eyes threatening to burst. She looked at the supervisor, hoping, just once, for him to intervene, to redirect the blame, to do his job. Instead, he leaned on the counter, voice dripping with false professionalism. "Ma'am, I apologize for the inconvenience. We're working on improving standards." Improving standards. The words hit harder than the insult. She was the standard being judged, measured, found lacking. She finished the transaction in silence. Her fingers moved automatically, muscle memory carrying her through as her thoughts blurred. The woman snatched her bags and walked off, muttering something under her breath that made her stomach twist. As soon as the customer was gone, the supervisor turned on her fully. "What did I tell you about slowing down the line?" he said, no attempt now to lower his voice. "You embarrassed the store like that, and you expect sympathy?" "I didn't," she began. He raised a hand. "Save it. I've had complaints all week. You think I don't notice patterns?" Her heart pounded. Patterns. She knew what he meant. She'd heard it before, dressed up in safer language, slipped into performance reviews and schedule cuts. "I work extra shifts," she said, unable to stop herself. "I come in early. I stay late. And yet," he replied, eyes scanning her from head to toe, lingering in a way that made her skin crawl, "customers still feel uncomfortable." There it was. A ripple passed through the nearby line. Some people pretended not to hear. Others leaned in, curious. The words weren't explicit, but everyone understood the implication. Her throat tightened. "Uncomfortable how?" she asked, voice barely steady. He smiled thinly. "You know how." The room felt smaller, air thicker. She could feel herself shrinking under the weight of it, years of swallowing things she wanted to say pressing against her ribs. "I just want to do my job," she said. "Then do it better," he snapped. "Or maybe find a place where you fit in." Fit in. Something cracked. She turned away, pretending to check the receipt printer, but her vision blurred. Tears spilled before she could stop them, silent and hot. She pressed her lips together, refusing to make a sound. Behind her, the line stalled. Someone cleared their throat impatiently. Another person sighed. That was when she whispered it. Not meant as a plea. Not meant for anyone. Just a truth slipping out under pressure. "Please," she murmured, fingers gripping the edge of the counter. "I can't lose this job." The supervisor scoffed. "Then stop acting like you're about to fall apart every 5 minutes." Her shoulders began to shake. She bowed her head, breathing shallow, fighting the urge to run. Images flooded her mind: hospital hallways, antiseptic smells, the tired smiles she'd promised to protect. The calendar on her fridge with dates circled in red. Bills stacked neatly because chaos was easier to manage when it was organized. "I'm not acting," she whispered. "I'm just tired." "Tired?" he repeated mockingly. "We're all tired." A man further back in line spoke up. "Hey, ease up." The supervisor shot him a glare. "This is an internal matter." The man shrugged but fell silent. Intervention fizzled as quickly as it sparked. She wiped her face again, ashamed of the tears, ashamed of needing anything at all. She straightened, took a breath, and looked up. Her eyes were red, but there was something else there now too, resolve hardening into place. "I'll finish my shift," she said quietly. The supervisor smirked. "Good. Because we'll talk about your hours after." Her stomach dropped. She knew what that meant. Fewer shifts. Less pay. More pressure. She nodded and turned back to the register. The line moved again, but the damage lingered, hanging in the air like a bruise no one wanted to touch. Every skin felt heavier, every glance sharper. Across the store, the man with the cap watched it all unfold. He hadn't left. He'd circled back, leaning against the display, eyes fixed on the register. He'd heard the words. All of them. He'd seen the way the room tilted against her, how authority and crowd fed off each other. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a bad day. It was systemic, practiced, comfortable. As the rush finally eased, she stepped back from the register, chest tight, legs unsteady. She didn't know how much longer she could hold herself together, didn't know what tomorrow would bring if her hours were cut again. She only knew one thing with certainty now: someone had hurt her. Someone had seen it happen. And as she disappeared toward the back room, unaware of who that someone truly was, the store hummed on, oblivious to the fact that everything was about to change. She sat on an upside-down crate in the back room, the concrete floor cold even through the soles of her shoes. The hum of the refrigeration units filled the silence, steady and indifferent. She pressed the heel of her hand into her eyes until the pressure almost hurt, as if pain might push everything else away. It didn't. The images kept coming back anyway, the smirk, the words, the way the room had turned against her like she was the problem simply for existing in it. She took a deep breath and opened her bag. Inside was a small, worn notebook, the corners bent, pages thick with ink. She flipped it open, scanning the familiar lines. Dates. Times. Exact phrases, written down as soon as she could after every shift. She hadn't started it out of confidence. She'd started it out of fear. Fear that one day she'd be told none of it happened, that she was exaggerating, that she was imagining patterns where none existed. Writing it down had been the only way to keep herself grounded. She heard footsteps outside the stockroom and stiffened instinctively. Her body had learned that sound too well. But when the door opened, it wasn't the supervisor. It was the man from earlier, the one with the cap, the quiet eyes. He paused when he saw her, hands raised slightly in a gesture of peace. "I don't want to intrude," he said. "I just wanted to check on you." She hesitated. Employees weren't supposed to talk to customers back here. That rule had been enforced selectively, like everything else. But something about his tone made her nod. "I'm okay," she said automatically, then exhaled. "I will be." He leaned against the shelf, careful to keep his distance. "What happened out there shouldn't have happened." Her throat tightened. She stared at the notebook in her lap. "It's not new." That surprised him. "How long?" She flipped a page, then another. "Months." He let the silence sit. He knew better than to rush it. "They don't yell," she continued quietly. "Not usually. It's always phrased like concern. Like standards. Like I'm the issue that needs fixing." She looked up then, meeting his eyes. "That's the part that messes with you. You start wondering if maybe they're right." He nodded slowly. "That's how systems protect themselves." She blinked. "You sound like you've seen this before." "I have," he said. "More times than I'd like." She studied him more closely now. His clothes were plain, but there was something about the way he stood, steady, grounded, unhurried. Not the posture of someone used to being dismissed. She glanced down at her notebook again. "I was going to take this to HR," she admitted. "But people talk. And people disappear." "Disappear how?" he asked. "Hours cut. Shifts changed. Written up for things everyone else gets away with." She closed the notebook carefully. "You stop being worth the trouble." He felt a familiar anger rise, sharp and focused. "Would you show me?" Her fingers tightened around the cover. This was the line she'd never crossed before. Sharing it made it real in a way even writing hadn't. Finally, she nodded and handed it to him. He read slowly. Each entry painted a picture more damning than the last. Patterns emerged, comments escalating after complaints, schedule changes following resistance, praise given publicly to others for work she'd done quietly. None of it alone would have raised alarms. Together, it was unmistakable. "You're thorough," he said softly. "I had to be," she replied. "No one believes feelings. They believe records." A voice echoed faintly from the front of the store. The supervisor calling for someone. She flinched. "I should go back," she said, standing. I don't want to give him another reason. He handed the notebook back. Before you do, can I ask you something? She paused. Okay. Why stay? The question landed heavier than she expected. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The answer was layered, tangled, and raw. Because I need the insurance, she said finally. Because my mom needs it more. Because this job was supposed to be stable. Her voice wavered. And because leaving feels like letting them win. He nodded, absorbing it. What if staying didn't mean enduring this? She let out a humorless breath. Then this would be a different place. He watched her walk back toward the floor, notebook tucked safely away, shoulders squared once more. The moment she disappeared, something in him shifted from observation to action. He spent the next hour moving through the store with purpose disguised as aimlessness. He spoke to employees during brief lulls, asking open-ended questions, listening more than he talked. Some were guarded. Others were eager, words spilling out once they realized he wasn't there to report them. Stories overlapped. Names repeated. The same supervisor. The same tactics. He checked publicly accessible scheduling boards, memorizing patterns. He stepped into the break area and scanned posted notices. He took mental notes, connecting dots that shouldn't have needed connecting in the first place. Near closing time, he returned to the front, leaning against the display near her register again. She was quieter now, movements efficient, face carefully blank. The supervisor hovered less openly but stayed within sight, eyes sharp. A customer made a joke at her expense. She smiled politely and ignored it. The supervisor smirked. That smirk sealed it. When the rush finally died down, she stepped away from the register, exhaustion etched into every line of her body. She caught the man's eye as she passed, unsure why she did it. He gave her a small nod, steady and reassuring. She didn't know it then, but that nod carried weight far beyond the moment. In the office upstairs, cameras blinked silently, logs recorded keystrokes, and data waited patiently for someone to care enough to look. Tonight someone would. And when the truth surfaced, it wouldn't be whispered behind a counter. It would be spoken out loud, where it could no longer be ignored. The store slowed as closing time approached, the bright overhead lights humming softly, casting long reflections across the polished floor. The last customers filtered out, their footsteps fading until only employees remained. There was a strange stillness that settled in moments like this, when the performance of the day ended and reality lingered in the quiet. She wiped down her register carefully, every movement deliberate. Fatigue sat deep in her bones, heavier than any shift she'd worked before. She expected the usual end-of-day routine, a dismissive glance, a curt instruction, the unspoken warning that tomorrow might bring fewer hours. She had already begun preparing herself for that disappointment. Then the supervisor's voice cut through the quiet. Everyone up front. Now. The tone was sharp, impatient, familiar. Employees exchanged glances, a ripple of unease passing through the group. She felt it too, a tightening in her chest, but she straightened and joined them anyway. Whatever this was, she would face it standing. They gathered near the registers, a loose semicircle of tired faces. The supervisor stood apart, arms crossed, jaw tight, clearly irritated by the interruption to his authority. The man with the cap stood near the edge of the group, hands relaxed at his sides. The supervisor cleared his throat. We're closing late because of issues today, he said, eyes flicking toward her. I want everyone to remember expectations. Professionalism. Standards. She felt the familiar heat rise but said nothing. She refused to give him the satisfaction. The man stepped forward. Actually, he said calmly, you're closing late because we're having a conversation. The supervisor frowned. Sir, the store is closed. You need to. The man removed his cap. The gesture was simple, unremarkable. And yet the air shifted. I don't need to leave, he said. This is my store. Silence hit hard and sudden, like a dropped weight. A few employees stared, unsure they'd heard correctly. Others gasped softly. The supervisor's face strained of color, mouth opening and closing as if words had forgotten how to work. "I'm the owner," the man continued, voice steady, carrying easily across the space. "And I've spent the day listening." He turned slightly, eyes scanning the group, not accusatory, not cold, just present. "I heard how people are spoken to. I saw how authority is used. And I read records that confirm this is not an isolated incident." The supervisor recovered enough to speak, panic sharpening his tone. "This is a misunderstanding. You don't have the full context." "I have notebooks," the man replied evenly. "Schedules. Complaint logs. Camera timestamps. I have context." Her breath caught. She felt lightheaded, as if the floor had tilted beneath her. This couldn't be real. And yet, it was unfolding right in front of her. The man faced the supervisor fully now. "You use performance language to disguise prejudice. You leverage job security to silence people who needed stability. You made a workplace unsafe and then blamed those who suffered for reacting." The supervisor's voice cracked. "I was enforcing standards. You were enforcing control," the man said. "And you did it badly." Security appeared quietly at the edge of the store, summoned without spectacle. The supervisor looked around, searching for support, but found none. Eyes dropped. Back straightened. No one spoke for him. "You're terminated," the man said. "Effective immediately. An investigation will follow. HR already has what it needs." The supervisor tried once more, desperation leaking through. "You're making a mistake." "No," the man replied. "I'm correcting one." The supervisor was escorted away, his footsteps echoing briefly before disappearing through the doors. The silence he left behind was different, lighter, charged with something like relief. The man turned back to the employees. "What happened here should never have happened," he said. "And I'm sorry it did." He looked at her then. "Not as a symbol. Not as a case study. Just as a person. You spoke the truth when it was hardest to do so," he said gently. "That matters." Her vision blurred. She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. "I didn't think anyone would listen." "I did," he said. "And I won't be the last." In the days that followed, change came swiftly and visibly. Schedules were restored. Back pay was issued quietly, without fanfare, because justice didn't need applause. Policies were rewritten with input from the people they affected. Training became mandatory, not theoretical. Reporting channels were rebuilt to protect, not punish. She was called into the office one afternoon, heart racing out of habit. But this time, the air felt different. She was offered a promotion, flexible hours, and the assurance, documented, enforced, that her job would never again depend on someone's comfort with her existence. She accepted, tears finally falling without shame. Weeks later, the store felt transformed. Not perfect, but honest. People laughed more. The tension that once clung to every interaction had loosened its grip. She stood taller now, not because the world had softened, but because it had finally met her halfway. On a quiet evening, the owner returned, no cap this time, just himself. He stopped at her register and smiled. "How's it going?" he asked. She smiled back, real and unguarded. "Better." As he walked away, she thought back to the moment she'd whispered the truth she'd been afraid to say out loud. The words that had once felt like weakness now felt like power. "I need this job." She still did. But now, she no longer had to beg for dignity to keep it.